In the next section, we're talking about in terms of the historical overview of transition and legislation specifically for special education. 4 key landmark pieces here include the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, Public Law 94-142, which was amended into the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act in 1990, 1997, and 2004. Keep in mind that there might be a lot of information, a lot of details about this, but it's just really important to remember that I will make sure to highlight where it's very important to remember, and also we are still operating under the 2004 Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It has yet to be amended since 2004. Just to highlight, to make sure they understand timeline-wise, first in 1997 was the Education for All Handicapped Children, 94-142, and it was reauthorized as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and 3 times now, so 1990, 1997, and currently we operate under the most recent amendment in 2004. So to kick it off, the Education of All Handicapped Children, Public Law 94-142 in 1975, it required all public schools accepting federal funds to provide equal access to education and 1 free meal a day for children with physical and mental disabilities. Also, public schools were required to evaluate students with disabilities and create an educational plan with parent input that would emulate as closely as possible to the educational experience of non-disabled students. It again contained a provision that students with disabilities should be placed in a least restrictive environment, one that allows maximum possible opportunity to interact and learn along with the non-disabled students. Finally, the law contains a due process clause that guarantees an impartial hearing to resolve conflicts between the parents of students with disabilities and the school system. Essentially, this law was passed to meet 4 key goals, and those included ensuring that special education services are available to children who need them, guaranteeing that decisions about services to students with disabilities are fair and appropriate, establishing specific management and auditing requirements for special education to ensure accountability. And also, it provides federal funds to help the states educate students with disabilities. In 1990, the Education of All Handicapped Children Act was amended to be Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or as we know it today, IDEA. And this required a transition component for the IEP by the age of 16. It is important to remember that this transition component is required in an IEP by the time the student turns 16. Then, it also included the first definition of transition and who should be included in transition meetings to find interagency collaboration, so all the service providers relative to ensuring that the student succeeds. And this was later amended in 1997 to include Individuals with Disabilities Act, still known as IDEA. It expanded to include related services that were added to support transition, such as rehabilitation counseling, therapeutic recreation, and transportation. It included activities to prepare students for a transition, like vocational education and applied technology education. Finally, the student's course of study was to be determined beginning at the age of 14. So a course of study, or whatever pathway, whatever deployment pathway they are on, has to be determined by the age of 14. And transition services that should be included to ensure that they're successful. Essentially, an increased expectation of involvement in the general curriculum for all students was expected at that point. Presently, in 2004, we currently operate under this Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, or IDEIA, and that further included transition services that should be designed with a results-oriented process, so including measurable and observable goals, right? And it focuses on improving academic and functional achievement of students. Students must be prepared for further education, employment, and independent living. Things must be done to ensure their success in those 3 settings. Transition requirements are to be followed when a student turns 16, so they're in place by the time they're 14, but they should be followed by the time they're 16. Transition IEP planning must include goals beyond high school. So they should look into the future and set the student up for life after high school. Students will have summaries of their accomplishments and needs upon graduation. A summary of performance. Summary of performance is another requirement of IDEA, and it includes academic and functional performance upon exits to be shared with employers and other post-school settings to facilitate successful transition. Should also make sure that it includes detailed information in terms of the services and supports that were available to the student to ensure success. Most recently, there was a case called Andrew F. versus Douglas County School District. And this is the United States Supreme Court case, and it ruled that under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or under IDEA, schools must provide students with an education that is reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress, appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. So this terminology is widely debated, and it's important to understand exactly what is meant by reasonably calculated, right? How do you measure that? So in a unanimous opinion written by Chief Justice John Roberts, the court held that proper standard under IDEA is markedly more demanding than merely more than de minimis. So the idea is that not just the bare minimum should be provided to an individual with disabilities, or any other student really with or without disabilities. People should be challenged, and people should be included in a rigorous standard of learning so that they can make sure that they are definitely making progress and they are being challenged and supported appropriately. Next, we'll just get a little bit more into those terminologies and language that's used in IDEA. As we know, it's already been widely debated, such as the Andrew F. case. It's important to know some of this language and how can we make sure that we are doing the things that meet this language. For example, the transition services definition. It's a coordinated set of activities for a child with a disability that is designed within a results-oriented process that is focused on improving the academic and functional achievement of a child with a disability to facilitate the child's movement from school to post-school activities, including post-secondary education, vocational education, integrated employment, and including supported employment, continuing and adult education, adult services, independent living, or community participation. You can see that transition services are designed to be wraparound services to help the student to be prepared for that life after high school environment, whatever it may be, in education, in employment, in independent living, community integration, whatever it may be. So to break apart, in terms of the transition services definition, to break apart that idea of the coordinated set of activities, what does that exactly mean? It's based on the individual student's needs, taking into account the student's strengths, preferences, and interests, and includes instruction, related services, community experiences, the development of employment and other post-school adult living objectives, and, if appropriate, an acquisition of daily living skills and provision of functional vocational evaluation. Discussing a little bit about some measuring and implementation of IDEA of 2004, there was designed to be an annual performance report in 2006. At that point, 20 indicators of compliance and results reported by all of the states to the U.S. Department of Education. It was revised in 2013 to cut out 3 indicators. Now there are 17 indicators. The ones that are really important for special education in Part B and grades K through 12 are indicators 1 and 2 in terms of graduation and dropout rates for students with disabilities. Indicator 13 is really, really important because it goes along with that whole idea about transition component of the IEP, which should be in place by the time the student is turning 16. Then, indicator 14, post-secondary activities 1 year after exit. Another important piece of IDEA is about age of majority. So beginning not later than 1 year before the child reaches the age of majority under state law. In North Carolina, it's age 18. The IEP must include a statement that the child has been informed of their rights and that the rights will transfer to the child on reaching the age of majority. So think about an individual with significant cognitive disabilities, for example. This is really for that caregiver to make sure that they know that And if they do not have something in place in terms of changing the rights over from the child to the caregiver, that the child will be its own guardian. So that is a case specifically that would require action. An individual who requires a great deal of support. In some cases, it wouldn't really matter. We all know that when we are turning 18, we are at the age of majority and we turn into our own guardians. We don't have to have our parents signing permission slips or things like that for us anymore. And we can make our own decisions legally. So it's just important to know that this still applies to individuals with disabilities. So to make sure that everybody is protected, all rights accorded to the parents under IDEA will transfer to the child at the age of majority. The student and the parent will be notified of this transfer before the child reaches, at least 1 year before the child reaches the age of majority. Here's some examples of rights that transfer. For example, receipt of written notice of meetings and participation in education decisions as a team member, as an IEP team member, the right to review educational records, the right to request meetings to review change in his or her identification evaluations of an individualized education program or placement, must ask the student for consent when needed rather than the parent, and it's a right to file a complaint, request due process, and participate in voluntary mediation. Essentially, these are just examples of rights that transfer. It's not a full list. Note that all educational rights transfer, and the age of majority is designed to help the students take charge, but it's also there to help teachers begin to think of the student as an adult. So if the student, for example, is also being looked at as an adult, what if the student is unable to attend? They've been invited. That's part of one of the rights that transfer to the student, and the student has all along anyway, but if the student does not attend the meeting, the school must take other steps to ensure that the student's preferences and interests are considered. That's really, really important as we're developing individualized education programs.